Okay, today I'm going to do a video of a full, detailed, and complete, almost complete rebuild of a Walbro WA or WT style carburetor. Now, these are a very common carburetor on lots of weed whackers out there, weed eaters, Troy-Bilts, Bolins. Some of the newer ones use them too, but typically the Walbros that are used nowadays are the more premium machines. Usually you'll see these on a little bit of an older machine, but they are relatively common. They go on quite a few things. I know they put them on lots of Troy-Bilts and weed eaters, and oh, they did home lights. They put lots of these on as well. So they are a common carburetor. You can tell if you have one of these if you come around and look at the front of the carburetor right here, where the primer bulb is on the top. It's going to say Walbro right there. And if you come around to the bottom of the carburetor, you're going to have a model number engraved into the carburetor. In this case, mine is a WT924A. Just that bottom number you want to look at. If the first two digits are WA or WT, this video is for you. This is going to be a rebuild for your carburetor. So I'm just going to take it very simply, step by step. I'll show you all the tools you're going to need, and I'm not going to complicate it any more than it has to be, because it doesn't have to be. So I'm going to start with displaying all the tools I'm going to use in this video. The first and most important thing that you should have is a Phillips head screwdriver. Typically, I would use a number 2 size, but some carburetors for one screw have a number 1 size. So I have that here also. But Phillips screwdriver. And then I always like to have some carburetor cleaner. Brake cleaner works too. I like to use that to clean off. The gasket surfaces and if there's any crud in the carburetor. And sticking onto the bottom of my can here is a razor blade. I like to use that to scrape off some of the gasket surfaces sometimes. Sometimes the gaskets can be quite aged on there. Sometimes it requires a little bit of scraping, so I do like to have a razor blade on hand as well. The other thing I like to have is a hammer and a center punch. And you'll see what that's for in a second. I'll take us through the video, and as I take it apart, I'll show you what that's for. Not required. You don't have to have these to rebuild it, but there is a few parts in here that, to be considered a full rebuild, you would need these two tools. Now, on 98% of the carburetors I rebuild, I don't use these, but I will show you later on what I'm talking about in that regard. I have laid out all the parts I will be using in this video. All these parts, by the way, can be found in a Walbro K20-WAT repair kit, a carburetor rebuild kit. This should contain all or more of the parts that you need to rebuild your carburetor. You can either go online and look for one of these, or you can probably, my guess is, many local small engine shops will have some of these in stock too. You can go and ask them. They will probably have some. If you go online, be careful, because most of the online kits are made by a third-party company or aftermarket. I usually like to stick with the genuine Walbro kits, the ones that actually say Walbro on the wrapping, because I believe that their parts are made a little bit better and made longer to last, and the aftermarket ones are not so much. But everybody experiences it differently. Some people have great luck with the aftermarket kits. I personally use the aftermarket kits in moderation. It just depends on what I'm fixing. Like if I'm fixing something very cheap and not worth something, maybe I'll do it. But most of the time I'll use a genuine kit. And this carburetor I have here is off of a Weed Eater Featherlight, like an FL26 curve shaft, one of the newer style Weed Eater Featherlights. Not that that matters anyway. It's going to be the same internals, but okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the carburetor upright, And by the primer bulb, you will see 2 Phillips head screws. When you pop these screws out, you are loosening the primer base assembly, and you are going to expose the fuel pump. Because actually in these carburetors, they are both a metering setup, so they meter fuel and air, and they also pump your fuel from the gas tank into the metering section of the carburetor. So they're kind of a 2-in-1 deal. So once those screws are out, the first thing that's gonna come off is on the top. There's gonna be this cover here. This is your primer base cover. I'm gonna go ahead and put that aside. And then after that, you're gonna have your primer bulb. This primer bulb should just pop right off. Sometimes they may be a little stiffer. Typically, these guys are in good enough shape where I don't have to replace them, but if you do have to replace them, you can either go online. Walbro has plenty of primer bulbs, or visit a small engine shop and they can get you hooked up with some of those. After that, you're going to see either a black, or sometimes they come in red. You're going to see this rubber piece here. This is actually a check valve. Now, if you go along the side with your finger, you can notice that you can actually kind of lift the check valve up a little bit. Around the side, it's kind of, you can kind of lift up the whole thing there, right? So you want to lift that side of that check valve up, and you actually want to pull on the side, and it should pull right out. There you go. It's going to pull right out. Now be careful to hold down the primer base while you do that, or else the primer base will come separated. And this check valve, again, you can replace these, but this is not a wearable item. So when we're done with the rebuild, we're just going to put this right back in. If you're experiencing a problem where, like, say your carburetor won't prime right, maybe I would consider replacing that. But other than that, it's not a wearable item, and it typically doesn't go bad. Now our primer base assembly is completely disassembled. So now we actually want to take the primer base assembly off. So this will just lift right off, and it looks like on this carburetor it does lift right off. Now in some cases, you may have to take it by this screw here and kind of pry it off because it might be a little stiff, but it looks like in my case it will just pop right off. Now when this comes off, oh wow, you can see that. I don't know if you could see that, but that is very stale gas right there. That means that this has been sitting. You see there's green here, and it's kind of yellow, and it's a little viscous too. That's very, very stale gas. It's been sitting for a while. So on this primer assembly, the gaskets will either fall out, or they'll be on here. But wherever you come across them, you will come across a diaphragm and a gasket. Now, sometimes the gasket will end up sticking to one of the surfaces, and that's where I like to use my razor blade to kind of come around and clean that up. Yeah, so you see my gasket's kind of tearing a little bit, right there a little bit, and right there a little bit. So maybe later on I'll go with my razor blade and just kind of clean that up. But when you separate these two pieces, you will end up with a diaphragm and a gasket. Don't worry about knowing where these go. We will go over that later. And sometimes they stick together, but they will separate. The diaphragm is either this blue color, or they have this tan color, is the newer model, and the gasket as well. There's nothing special about it. So I'm going to go ahead and stick the diaphragm and the gasket over here. And now we have access to our main fuel pump body of our carburetor. So how this works is fuel goes in this chamber, out this hole, it gets pumped into this hole, it goes into this chamber, and this is actually on that diaphragm, is where the diaphragm goes up and down, and it pumps fuel through this chamber, into this chamber, through the primer base, into this chamber. And this chamber, you can see there's actually a screen in there. That kind of acts as a little micro last-minute fuel filter. You shouldn't wait for that screen to get clogged because that's technically not, if that screen gets clogged, then your machine's not going to run, is what the deal is. So what I need to do now is that screen actually will come out. Typically, you can use either a, sometimes it's easier for me to use like a pick or something, maybe even a paper clip. You can get it out, but sometimes I can actually get it out with my Phillips screwdriver. If I kind of grasp the screwdriver against the side of the screen and kind of pry up a little bit, sometimes the screen will come out. If it doesn't, oh, there it goes. You see the screen just kind of popped out. If you have trouble, sometimes these screens are really stuck in there. What you can do is you can grab a paper clip and puncture the screen and bend it once you've punctured the screen, and it should pop out then. And sometimes these screens can actually turn into like a silt if you run ethanol in your fuel. Sometimes what will happen is if they're really old, the screen will actually solidify and it won't allow any fuel to pass through there. So these screens are considered very wearable, and they should be replaced regularly every time you take the carb apart, really. And sometimes when you take the screen out and you can try to bend the sides of it, it might be hard. That definitely indicates that the screen is worn because the new ones are supple. You could take your fingers and you could bend them really easily. This one, you can bend it, but it's definitely harder to bend. Like I'm trying a little bit and I definitely can't bend the whole thing, but the new ones are very supple. So that means this screen is definitely very worn. Once you take that screen out, there will be a little passage in there. There is a tiny, tiny passage through there. That will actually end up going through to the other side. We will see that where that goes in a moment, but you just want to make sure that eventually that will all get cleaned up in there. So we're halfway done. It's halfway taken apart by this point. So we're going to focus on taking off the other side of the carburetor now. This side is referred to as the metering side. What this side does is the diaphragm in here actually controls the fuel flow into the engine, whereas this side pumped the fuel up into the gas tank. This side actually controls how much fuel goes in your engine, right? So, oh, you know what I'm going to do first? I'm going to go ahead and scrape off my little bit of gasket material with this razor blade on my, this is called a primer base, this little cover here. I'm going to go ahead and scrape off my excess gasket material with my razor blade on this primer base. It doesn't have to be perfect. I just like to get it off because the flatter it generally is, the better. When you're doing this, you'll have to be careful because you'll actually see on this there are little tiny ridges there. Those ridges are actually to help the gasket press on there and seal really well. So when you're scraping, try not to gum up those seals, those grooves there, because they do help the gasket seal. They shouldn't be too brittle. They are metal, but just keep in mind that they are there. This surface is not supposed to be flat. That groove is supposed to be there. I'm going to go ahead and spray some carb clean on my paper towel and wipe down the primer base here. Sometimes the carb clean helps loosen up some of the gasket material. It gets it really clean. Again, this one is pretty pristine. The gasket surface is actually not too bad on this one. Okay, we'll go ahead and set that aside for now. We'll come back to it later. So I'm going to go ahead and put that. I'll put it right here. Okay, so from here, we're going to go ahead and dig into the metering side of the carburetor. To get into this side, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 screws. They are Phillips head. They are short screws. They should come off with ease. It's very difficult to mix up the metering side screws and the fuel pump side screws because the metering side screws, if you could see, the fuel pump screw is on the right and the metering screw is on the left. They're very, very different in size. The longer one is going to be for the fuel pump side, and the metering one is always the smaller one. Okay, so at this point I have all 4 of my screws out. Sometimes this can be quite a burden to get this cover off. Sometimes on these you'll actually have a cover that looks like this. It doesn't actually extend all the way up here. Most of them actually. You'll have a cover that looks like this, and you'll have no way to, get here and pry and take it off. So it can get difficult sometimes. Sometimes what I'll like to do is I'll just like to, I'll work it for a little bit at first, and if it still doesn't come off, then maybe I can kind of whack the side of it a little bit and see if it comes off then. And if it still doesn't come off, what I'll do is I'll take like a pick or something and stick it in there and pry it out with this little hole here. Now that's obviously it's not how it's supposed to be done, but we're going to replace everything in here, so it wouldn't matter anyway, just as long as you can get it off. Most of them should come off pretty easy. In this case, I could pry right here to take it off, but I'm going to try to take it off just prying around here in case you have this cover and you can't use this to pry. See, mine's actually pretty stiff. Oh, there it goes. So how I got that off is I just took my fingers and right at the corner here, I just kind of pried up on it and it came off. So I'm going to go ahead and set this cover aside. From here, it'll either stick on this cover or it'll stick on this cover. You will get another diaphragm and another gasket. They're going to be a little bit different. Ooh, boy, that's fun. Wow, that's very spoiled. Okay, so you notice that when I pulled this off, one of two things happened. Firstly, the diaphragm did come off. This is the guy that usually is your culprit to, if it's been sitting over the fall and it won't start in the springtime, usually this is the problem, because what can happen over time is diaphragms, if you go ahead and move it back and forth like this, sometimes you can actually hear it. It'll make like a clicking sound. Some of them are really bad, but this one, it clicks a little bit, but it's still pretty supple. Even if they still seem pretty supple to you, it's still always almost a must to replace these, because they do harden up. They are supposed to be very, 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 very loose, and they harden up without without you noticing. So it's almost always a must to replace these guys. Secondly, it looks like more of my gasket actually stuck onto my carburetor this time. This is where I'm going to come in with my razor blade. Very lightly, very, very lightly, I'm going to push down and I'm going to work my way around the carburetor and take that off. It should come off really easy. And maybe I'll come in with some carb clean and clean off that gasket surface. Like I said on the previous one, it doesn't have to be perfect. This one actually does not have a ridge to seal that gasket. So this one is flat, this surface here. I'm going to go ahead and call that good enough for now. Now in here, you're going to notice there's quite a few things in here. You have this little round thing here, this round thing here, and then this little, this thing goes up and down, it kind of flaps, and there's a screw here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to take this whole assembly out here that moves up and down. So what you're going to do is you're going to want to pop this screw out. This screw is sometimes where you'll need the smaller screwdriver. Sometimes this screw you cannot take out with a number 2 screwdriver because it's too big. But it looks like in my case, oh, you know what? Yeah, I don't think I can take it out with a number 2 screwdriver here. It's too small of a screw. So I'm gonna use my number 1 screwdriver. That might actually help it come out easier. Yep. Okay. So when you go ahead and take this screw out, you want to make sure to put your thumb over this part here. You want to hold it all down, or else you're going to have a big explosion everywhere. I'm going to go ahead and completely remove that screw, while still keeping my thumb there. This screw is separate from the rest of them. The metering screws are going to look very, very similar to this. This screw is actually separate from the rest of them. So we're going to put this one in a totally different pile. That one, if you mix up with the metering screws, it really will not go together very well. You're not supposed to do that. Okay, I went ahead and cleaned up a little bit here. Right now I have taken this screw out and I'm still holding this down. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it upside down and then I'm going to let go. And you're going to see there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 things that fly out here. So I'm going to let go and you see a bunch of stuff fell out there. So, oh, it looks like in this case, one thing stayed in here. So when everything falls out, you should have, this is called a metering lever. This bounces up and down, and on this side it actually grabs the needle, and this side the diaphragm pushes down right here, and it lifts up the needle a little bit to meter how much fuel is going into the engine. Of course, there's other factors too, but that's the simplest way I can describe it. Now, out of this metering lever here, we'll slide a pin. That pin, we'll replace that pin. I know some of the newer kits may not come with the pin. Keep the pin around just in case. So that we have the metering lever, we have the pin, and we actually have the needle that fell out right here. The needle, if it didn't fall out, it would have been in this hole right here. You can typically just grab it out with your finger or pry it out if it doesn't come out. But this is your needle. Sometimes you will have a smaller needle. At the bottom here, it's a kind of like a coated surface that actually contacts the metal seat. And this is actually what stops the fuel from flowing. When the engine's off, the needle will shut. So if you see over here in my new parts, I have a big needle and a little needle. It's the same principle. Some of them have a little needle and some of them have a big needle. There's no difference other than the size of the needle. Obviously, you don't want to put the little needle that's supposed to have a big one, or a big one that's supposed to have a little one. Whichever one comes out of your carburetor, you want to put back in. So I'm going to put that over there. And the last thing, it looks like it's stuck to my carburetor here, is a spring. Now this spring, they do not supply any longer in the carburetor kits from Walbro. So if you lose this spring, typically the aftermarket carburetor kits still come with the spring if you were to lose it. But it's very small. Ooh, and it's jumpy. So try not to lose that spring if at all possible. And this is typically how far apart I will take my carburetors. The only other farther apart that you could take it is you could pop out the jets. Now you would of course need special screwdrivers to pop out the jets, which I have, but I'm not a big fan of popping out the jets because if you pop out the jets, the little seals inside of the jets may get tampered with. Sometimes it's an O-ring. Sometimes they put a coating on the screw. Sometimes it's like a Loctite or some sort of thing on the screw. Sometimes it's just pipe thread or like a taper thread to seal it here. So I'm not a big fan of taking them out because there's a chance that when you put them back in, they're not going to be airtight, and that's not good. So you could take them out. I don't like to because it risks the seals in the jets. You know, there's a chance that they will not seal once you go to put them back in. And there's also a chance that you could lose your setting on the screws. So I would leave them in, but whatever works. Also, these little round things in the carburetor, these are called Welch plugs. And what these do is these actually seal off some smaller passageways in the carburetor that may have a potential to getting clogged. So the reason they put these here is because it's not ideal to service these, but it's possible. And the reason that they don't make it easier is because typically where there's a Welch plug never ever has to come out in the life of a carburetor ever. Now, of course, there are exceptions, like if there is actually a clog back under one of these. This one, there is 3 or 4 small passageways. I believe some of them may have to do with the idle circuit. Don't quote me on that though. But that's what's under this. This one, there's actually another small screen. I believe that's also for the idle circuit. Don't quote me on that, but that should never get clogged. It's very, very rare if that gets clogged. But if that were to get clogged, the genuine Walbro carburetor kits come actually with a new screen to replace that with in there. If your machine is not idling, but it will run high idle, then maybe pull that Welch plug out and just check that screen. This one, I'm going to be all honest with you, I have no idea what's under there. I've never, ever, ever had to take that little one out before. My guess is it's going to lead down to the jets. It's going to give you access to the jets in case maybe the passageway in the jets is clogged. My guess is that that's what's there. So I'm going to actually take out this big one. Now again, you shouldn't have to do this because 99% of the times none of these passageways are going to be clogged. In rare cases they will be. So I'm just going to take out one. Just to demonstrate for the video, but I almost guarantee you that I don't have to. And that's actually what my hammer and punch comes in for. So this is actually going to be a little bit of a violent way to get this out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to punch with my hammer sideways on this Welch plug, enough that I either puncture the Welch plug and I can get something in there, or enough that I have some sort of a gripping point on the Welch plug. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pry out with my center punch, and the Welch plug should come out. You do have to be careful not to go straight down because you will puncture, you'll damage the bottom of the carburetor, whatever the heck is under the Welch plug. So you do have to be careful. So I'm going to go ahead and attempt to take this Welch plug out. Again, I'm only going to take out one because in theory, none of them should have to come out. Okay, so I kind of started with a little bit of a dent right there. So I'm going to go ahead and work that dent inwards. It looks like this Welch plug is very stuck and does not want to come out right away. Looks like I'm having a very hard time with it. I think I'm going to go with plan B. I'm going to try drilling a little micro hole through the side of that Welch plug there. I'm going to see if I can get something to pry in there with maybe a pick or something. Again, 99% of the time, you will not have to take a Welch plug out. So if you're just doing a regular rebuild, don't take a Welch plug out because you could do more harm than good. Ask me how I know. There we go. Oi! Well, wasn't that a lot of work, huh? And there you go. All that's under there, and you see actually there's a little bit of metal shavings in here. Hold on. Okay, I spray that out with Carb Clean there, and all you can see is there's just 3 or 4 little passageways in there. Now this one, like I said, there's going to be a little screen in there, but that should never, ever, ever get clogged. Yeah, there should really never be a point that you have to take those Welch plugs out. And if you ever come to the point where you decide you need to take a Welch plug out, you should have first rebuilt the whole carb and tested it and adjusted it first. Like those Welch plugs should never have to come out. I'm just doing it just to show you how to do it, just in case. So I'm actually going to go ahead and leave that out. As you can see, there's my old Welch plug. I had to drill through it in order to get it out, because I couldn't just do it, drill it with just get it out with a center punch. It was too tough. So from this point, obviously, Welch plug or not, the carburetor is fully apart, at least enough that we can then go ahead and rebuild it. What I'm going to do actually is I'm going to take my carburetor, my primer base, my little primer cover, and my metering cover, and I'm actually going to stick those in my ultrasonic cleaner for a half an hour. Again, not everybody's going to have an ultrasonic cleaner at home, so this isn't something that everybody should do. What you could do is you could soak the carburetor in Carb Clean overnight, or soak it in gasoline overnight, something like that. That will do just as good. But I'm going to use my ultrasonic cleaner because I really like it, and I think it does a great job to clean out all the little old gas or gasket surfaces or dirt that we missed. Like right here, it'll clean all that out real good. And again, soaking it overnight in either Carb Clean or gasoline, maybe like ethanol gasoline, will probably work just as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stick these guys in the ultrasonic, and I will come back to you once I've done that. Okay, so I ran the metering cover, the primer base cover and the primer base, and the carburetor through the ultrasonic. Again, a bucket of carburetor cleaner or a bucket of gasoline overnight, soaking it. It should do just about the same effect. But my ultrasonic actually did a really nice job. It cleaned up these gasket surfaces really nicely. I only have a little bit left, which is absolutely fine. It got all the dirt out of it. Remember, there was some dirt in here, and on the other side in that screen, where the screen went, there was some dirt in there also. It did a fantastic job at getting that out. And on the primer base, it cleaned up around the edge where the primer bulb was, along with the inside of there. And it also got off most of the gasket material on this base as well. It did a fantastic job. I certainly am very pleased with it. If you can't get it this clean, Carb Clean is definitely your best friend. You definitely want to spray it down with Carb Clean and wipe it off, or soak it in Carb Clean really overnight is what you should do. The other thing you want to make sure is that your butterfly here opens and closes freely, because sometimes what will happen is if I put it in the ultrasonic or if I soak it somewhere, what will happen is the butterfly will open it and it'll just stay open. It won't shut. Just make sure that it moves freely. And this one actually moves quite well. Same with the choke lever should be okay, but yeah, that moves quite well. And it actually cleaned up inside where the adjustment screws are too. So yeah, I'm very, very pleased with the results that the ultrasonic did. So now I'm going to start reassembling the carburetor. The first thing I'm going to do is I guess I can start with the entire metering side. The first thing I'm going to do is I would like to put my Welch plug back in. What you could always do is you could lightly spray down there with carburetor cleaner. I don't recommend using compressed air on here, because sometimes the newer model carburetors will have a little check valve here, and if you spray in the wrong place, you could ruin a check valve. I definitely would lean against compressed air. I would just spray carburetor cleaner in these little holes just to make sure that they're all clear. But I'm going to go ahead and put my Welch plug back in. So in your carburetor kit, you should get, I think they give you 3 sizes of Welch plugs. It's going to be the biggest one in the kit is the one that you're going to use for that one. But again, you definitely shouldn't have to take out your Welch plug. 98, 99% of the time, you shouldn't have to take out your Welch plug. So I'm just going to do this just for demonstration. So on the Welch plug, you'll see there is a convex and a concave side, or in other words, it's not flat, and one side will be convex, one side will be concave. The concave side you want to put face down, and the convex side you want face up, just like this. I'm not sure if you could see that, but you want it in this orientation when you put it back onto the carburetor. So I'm going to go ahead and take my Welch plug. There's going to be a little groove in the carburetor there that Welch plug will set flush into. So it'll slide right in there, and it shouldn't move at all when you put it in there. You see that? It's a very precise fit. The Welch plug went in. It's not really moving at all. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a punch, and I am going to punch down on the center of that Welch plug a little bit. The principle of that is because the Welch plug is actually rounded, when I punch it down, it'll actually expand the edges of the Welch plug a little bit, allowing the Welch plug to create a seal on this surface here. So to pound the Welch plug back in, I'm actually going to use this punch. It's a little bit different from a center punch as the end here is flat. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to use this side of the punch. When I put this side of the punch on here, it covers more surface area of the Welch plug, whereas if I were to use this side, it only gets a small area, which can risk the Welch plug breaking in just that confined area. So I'm going to use this side, and I'm going to hammer. Actually, I'm going to hammer on the top of the punch here. Before you do this, make sure that the Welch plug is set correctly. Very light tap. You don't want to go very hard, because if you go too hard, it could go too far. The Welch plugs are fragile, so just a light tap. You want to check it, take it back off and check it. So you notice here what that did is that made a little indentation in that Welch plug. It made it a little bit flat. I want to keep going, so it's a little bit more flat, because that's not going to quite seal very well. So I'm going to keep going. Okay. Okay, so what I kind of did there is, you saw the raw footage. What I did is I just kind of punched down the Welch plug to make it more flat, and it's no longer all rounded on the top. Now, I probably could have kept going a little bit, but I don't want to go too overboard, because you only get one Welch plug in a kit, and if you overbang it, you will have to buy a new one. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put the metering lever, the spring, the pin, and the needle back in. Now this can be quite tricky, because what you have to do is you have to position all your parts on the needle here, and just hope that they don't fall off. So before we move forward, I will note that I will be using a metering lever gauge by Walbro for this procedure. If you do not have one of these metering lever gauges, then I would recommend actually putting in your old metering lever, because it is already set and it already has the right settings on it. So I would put your old metering lever back in if you do not have one of these metering lever gauges. Okay, But I'm going to put my new one in, and I'm going to show you how to readjust your metering lever gauge. So this is my new one. A lot of times in the OEM Walbro kits, they will already be adjusted, but you want to really make sure. So I would still recommend using your old metering lever. But I would still use your new needle, your new pin, and you may have to use your old spring too, because typically in the newer kits, they do not supply a spring any longer. So what I'm going to do is, this is going to be quite difficult, but what I'm going to start by is I'm going to take my spring and I'm actually going to put it in the little groove in the carburetor there. The back is for the needle, but this one right here, there's a little groove and a little indent. I'm actually just going to place the spring in there with my fingers, and I'm going to try, sometimes it takes a few tries, but I'm going to try to balance it so it sits straight up. There we go. You see it kind of sits straight up right there. Now this can be a little bit difficult, so you have to kind of get the hang of it. I'm going to leave my carburetor like that, and I'm just going to let that spring sit there vertically. Then I'm going to take my metering lever, actually flip it upside down, and you will see there's either a little notch or a protruding groove on it. This actually indicates where the spring will rest. This little notch here, the spring will actually rest on that notch. So for reference, when we put everything back together, the spring is supposed to be in that notch. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my metering lever. I'm going to position it like this, right side up. And I'm actually going to grab my thumb and my index finger, and I'm just kind of grip the lever like that. And I'm going to hold the front of it. That kind of gives you the best grip on the lever when you're installing everything back into place. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my new pin. I'm going to slide it in my metering lever. Whether that's your old one or your new one, I would still use the new pin. And on the carburetor, when you slide your pin in, it's going to have to be indented a little bit to the left or to the right. So it's either going to have to be positioned like that or like that. It's not going to be centered. If you look at your carburetor, you can kind of see there's an indentation where the metering lever sits. If the screw is going to sit to the right of the metering lever, then push your pin so there's more on the right. Or if the screw is on the left of the metering lever, push it so that the majority of the metering pin sits on the left. In my case, the screw is on the right, so I'm going to push it like this. So it's going to be asymmetrical to the right. And then I'm going to grab my new needle. Your new needle should be gray or black at the tip here. There shouldn't be any red markings or wear marks. At the other end of the needle, there is a little groove right there. And that groove is designed to slide right into this little slit on the back of the metering lever right here. So this is quite the tricky part. You have to keep the metering lever level so that the pin doesn't fall out, and you also have to keep it at an upwards angle so the needle stays put in there. Just like that. The pin is in there, and the needle is also in there. By the way, in my case, I am using the larger needle because I took the larger needle out. If you have the smaller needle that came out, then you're obviously going to want to put the smaller needle back in. But just like that, I'm going to rest everything. And now for an even more tricky part, I'm going to grab the carburetor and I'm going to put the needle into this hole back here while making sure that the spring lines up with the groove on the bottom of the metering lever and that the pin makes it into its groove. So sometimes it takes a few tries. Sometimes it takes me 5 or 6 tries to do this, but this one's generally not too bad. You see how my spring kind of went sideways already there? I have to make sure that the spring is straight first. There you go. You see how I straightened out the spring? If the spring's sideways, it's not going to work. So you have to make sure that the needle goes into the hole. You want to keep working everything down. And once I get down to about here where my fingers can't quite go anymore, what I'll do is I'll put my thumb on the top here while I gradually, oh, my pin kind of slid out there. Move my pin back. And I'll gradually let go of my other two fingers. And in theory, maybe I'll give this a little push into place. There we go. And then I'll replace my thumb on the front here, like that. And there you go. You see how the pin has slid into place along with the needle. It is in its place. And if I can slide my finger aside a little bit here, you can see, I don't know if you can, but I can see that that spring is resting on the groove of the metering lever, right, like it should. If the spring is not resting on that groove, then unfortunately, you have to take it back out and do it over. From here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take that one special screw, the little bit of the smaller screw that went in here before, and I'm going to put that same screw back in. Now, in my case, I just put it to the side here. You definitely don't want to mix this up with all the other metering cover screws that go on the outside because they are different. So I'm actually going to put this screw back in here. And I believe this was the screw I had to use my smaller screwdriver. I'm going to go ahead and put this screw back in here. And what this screw is going to do is it's actually going to push down on that metering lever there. So I'm going to keep on holding my thumb on top of this lever until I get that screw not tight but snug. So I'm going to keep going. And as you as you tighten the screw, the pin should rest itself further into the carburetor. Okay, so it's not tight, but it's snug. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and lift my finger off. And if everything's done right, nothing should fly out. And before we go ahead and tighten that screw, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press on the tip of the metering lever with my screwdriver. What should happen is the metering lever should go down smoothly and it should lift up the needle a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and push on it. So you notice how the metering lever goes down and it kind of lifts the needle up just a hair. And you also notice that when I push it down, it comes back up. That means the spring is working correctly. So that's a good thing. This is the correct operation of this. Once you have determined that that is working correctly, I'm going to go ahead and snug this screw down. Now this screw you do not want very tight at all. It's just an 1/8 of a turn or so past snug, because this screw will both strip out and break if you make it too tight. Of course, you don't want it too loose, then it will rattle out and this will come apart, but try not to make this guy too tight. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to adjust my metering lever. Now you can skip this step if you used your old metering lever. We will not be needing this if you use your old metering lever, because in theory, it should already be adjusted. But because I put my new one in here, it may or may not be adjusted. So how this works is on the metering lever, it'll display a bunch of prefixes to the carburetor model numbers. In our case, we're either working with a WA carburetor or a WT carburetor. And that text is on the center of this W here. So the way this tool works is you actually take it on the top of the carburetor, place this side on the left, place this side on the right, and you actually run it right across the carburetor. Just like this. Just like that. And what you're watching for is that middle part of the W in relation to the metering lever. Now, how it should be adjusted is when you run it across, the middle section of the W should just barely miss the metering lever, or just barely touch it. Now, in my case, it looks like I am in a pretty good position here. It's just barely missing the metering lever. If the metering lever in your case is too far down and it's not quite touching the W, then what you would do is you would take either a pick like this or your fingers sometimes or a screwdriver, and you just take that needle and just give it a little bit of upward pressure, just a little weeny bit. And what you'll do is you'll actually bend that metering lever up. And then you can go ahead and check it again. And then if it ends up being too far up, if the metering lever actually touches this part of the W, then what you have to do is you actually have to hold down the needle right here. Usually I like to do it with a screwdriver. I like to just hold it down, and then you want to push down on the metering lever. And in theory, it should bend it back into place. But again, you just want to verify with the tool. You want to go back and check it. You want it until it's just either barely touching or barely missing. Ideally, just barely missing. If you notice that when you run it across, that it actually pushes the metering lever down and lifts the needle, that means you're too far up and you need to adjust it down. So that's that. The metering lever and the needle are all back into place. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put my diaphragm and gasket back on, followed by the cover. So in your carburetor kit, you will see these two gaskets and these two diaphragms here. The carburetor kit will come with a number of other gaskets and diaphragms, but you're just going to want to go ahead and pick out these four for the WA or WT model. Sometimes if you have a carburetor with no primer bulb or no primer base on it, sometimes the fuel pump gasket and diaphragm will be a little bit different, and you'll just kind of have to fit what goes best on the carburetor based on what you took out of the carburetor. So in my case, it would be these two guys. But for now, we're going to focus on the metering side. And you should come across a gasket that looks like this and a diaphragm that looks like this. There's only one diaphragm in there that looks like this. And there's two gaskets that look like this kind of. But one of them kind of has like a little tail at the bottom, whereas this one doesn't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put these guys on there. If you look at the top of the carburetor, you will see two pegs almost. You will also see two holes on the top of the gasket and the diaphragm. So those holes will line up with these pegs on the carburetor. And that's how you can kind of tell that everything's aligned correctly. So if your gasket surfaces are all nice and clean, along with the gasket surface of your metering cover, again, that metering cover can also look like this with no top section. Typically, they will look like this. If the gasket surface is all nice and clean, then what you can go ahead and do is install the diaphragm and gasket. On the metering side, always put the gasket first, because it does get a little mixed up, because on the opposite side we put the diaphragm first. But on this side, if you're starting with the carburetor, the gasket always goes first, not the diaphragm. Because if you put the diaphragm first, then it's likely when you start it up, it'll start leaking out of the front of the carburetor, because the diaphragm will push this down when the machine is off. That could happen, but the proper way to put it on is the gasket will go on first. So I'm going to go ahead and put my gasket on and slide it in the two grooves, just like that. It should slide in very perfectly. After that, I'm going to go ahead and put my diaphragm on. The diaphragm is different on both sides. So on this side, you will see a little peg kind of poking out here along with some holes. Whereas on the other side, you don't see that. All you see is just a little point here. You're going to want to put this side up and this side down. The side with the plate here and the holes, this goes down and this goes up. So when you're putting the diaphragm on the carburetor, it's going to be positioned like that. The reason being is this little peg here actually pushes on the metering lever. If you put it on this way, then there's obviously nothing for it to push on. So we're going to put it on this way. And I'm going to go ahead and line up my holes. If you go ahead and push down on the little metal part of the diaphragm here, you should feel that the metering lever will move and the needle will go up. Sometimes I like just to make sure that it lines up correctly. And if everything is lined up, you should be able to feel that metering lever go up and down. And in my case, it does. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to align these guys just to make sure that the holes on the side are all lined up. And then I'm going to place my metering cover on. In my case, I have 2 more holes here. If you have a cover like this that doesn't have the holes at the top, you can either put it left, right, up, down. It doesn't matter. The only difference is this little hole here will be oriented differently. I have never seen a reason to put it a particular way. I believe it's perfectly square and you could just put it whichever way. But in my case, I have 2 holes here, and I'm going to line these 2 holes up with the 2 pegs. Like that. Oh, you see my diaphragm kind of got out of alignment here. I want to make sure that they're in the right place. There you go. If you look down at the carburetor, you should be able to see right through both the gasket and the diaphragm, right to the screw holes. If that's the case, then you're good to go. If that's not the case, then maybe realign, maybe take this cover back off and recheck your diaphragm and gasket to make sure they're aligned correctly. After that, I'm going to take my 4 metering screws. Again, the metering screws are all the same, and the fuel pump screws are all the same. They're the longer ones. If you notice that one of the metering screws appears to look different, then you may have accidentally put the metering screw where the needle is supposed to go, the metering lever and the pin. So maybe pop that screw back out just to make sure it's not one of the metering screws. But I'm going to go ahead and put my 4 screws back in here. Maybe I'll start them up by hand. Okay, once I started these guys up by hand, I'm going to go ahead and take my screwdriver. I'm just going to go ahead and snug them up just until they don't move anymore. Very, very loosely. And these screws especially are very, very delicate. So usually what I'll do is I will determine a set torque just with my hands, and very, very, very lightly I will just snug them up. Because if you go too tight, these guys will break and strip out. Ask me how I know. So I'm only going to go maybe a quarter turn or so past snug. And you'll feel they will kind of not want to move anymore. That's all I'm doing, just a little quarter turn. All you're required to do here is to seal the gasket. You're not trying to hold lug nuts on or anything. And that's that. The metering side is back together. Now all we have to do is the fuel pump side, which is not too difficult to do. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put the screen back in. Now, in this case, the Walbro screens tend to be quite large in diameter, so they can be a little bit difficult to put back in. But I'll show you my technique that I like to use to put them back in. Again, you could, if you wanted to, use a screwdriver and just poke the screen in, but I find it takes a very long time to get used to because the screen typically goes in unevenly if you use just a screwdriver. So what I'm going to do is I am going to place the screen on here just evenly. Make sure it gets covered everywhere. Make sure it's the most even it can be. And my technique to do this is what I like to do is actually use a Torx driver and push down on the screen so it goes in. This is a T40. I think that the T40 for the Walbros is just the right size. It's not too large, so it has a hard time going in, but it's not too small so that it will go in unevenly. What I like to do is I like to take my Torx driver and just push down straight on the screen nice and evenly. And you'll feel it stop. When it stops, lift it out. And in my case, that screen went in very, very well. You can see on all sides of that, it looks like it's pretty even. If you find you put your screen in and it's kind of uneven, pop your screen back out and try again. Another thing you could do is you could use a drill bit, the backwards end of a drill bit, and stick it in there and push the screen down also. I like to use this because it's most convenient to me and it's also flat on the end, whereas a Phillips screwdriver is pointed. So it will work. It'll take longer to do, but that's the way I like to do it. Okay, so the next thing to do is we are going to put the gasket and diaphragm back on here, the fuel pump side. So what I like to do in this case is actually I like to put my gasket and diaphragm on the primer base to start, because on here there's no pegs for the gasket and diaphragm to go into, whereas on here you have one here and here, so they'll easily slide back onto here. Now on this side, looking at the carburetor, the diaphragm goes first, and then the gasket goes the other way. It goes on top. So if you were putting it on from the carburetor, the diaphragm would go first. And by the way, this is wrong. You will notice if you put it on like this, none of the holes will line up. So the diaphragm does go on this way. You could tell this is correct because these two little flaps here perfectly cover two little holes. And the screw holes also cover the screw holes. And all the other holes, everything lines up. And then the gasket obviously would go on like this. If this works for you and all the holes line up very well for you, you can go ahead and put the primer base back onto here. Now, the one thing you need to be careful of when you're putting the primer base on is when you put it on, this idle screw will get in the way of your butterfly. So what you want to do is you want to just open the butterfly a little bit with your finger so that it gets out of the way of that idle screw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to match the pegs with the holes on the carburetor so that my idle screw will go next to the butterfly. I'll go ahead and set it on top. Sometimes I have to feel around a little bit. If you have to push down, you may be forcing something. So if you have to push down, maybe recheck your alignment. And in my case, whoop, everything just slid off. There we go. So and then you can let go of the butterfly. Just make sure when you let go of the butterfly, you're holding a firm grip on the primer base so it doesn't fly off. And that's how you put the diaphragm and the gasket back on the primer base side. Now I'm going to actually take this back off because I'm going to show you another way that actually I like better to put the diaphragm and the gasket on the primer base side. What I like to do is I actually like to start at the primer base and start with the gasket and put it on the pegs of the primer base. So that way there's something for the diaphragm and gasket to actually grip onto. Now the diaphragm would go first because it would go upside down eventually. But I like to kind of put it like this. So the diaphragm and gasket rest in those pegs. And then you can open your throttle body a little bit. You can even put it on upside down if you want and match the pegs with the holes. It goes on way easier for me. That's how I like to do it. And then you want to make sure to hold a firm grip on the primer base here, because if you do let go, it will fall back off because the butterfly is now putting tension on the screw here and it'll fly off. So you want to make sure to hold tension on this. After that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and put my check valve back in. This is very important because sometimes I have put the carburetor back together, I'll put it on the engine, and I'll hit the primer bulb and nothing happens. Well, I'm wondering what the heck is going on. Maybe I got to get a new carburetor now. Well, I forgot to put the check valve back in. It's this little black or red, sometimes they make them, little unit here. You'll see there is a flat side and then there is a protruding side. On the protruding side, you will see there is a little lip on the check valve there. And your goal is to get that lip below the surface of this brass fitting here. So to do that, what I like to do is I like to put it real close and I like to observe it. I'll put the end of the check valve in here. Sometimes you have to spin it a little bit to kind of get it back in there. There we go. And then if you look under the check valve here, you can actually see the lip has not made it under there yet. So what I like to do is I like to actually press down on the check valve pretty hard. You got to press real hard and twist my finger. Sometimes if you put soapy water on here, it'll help maybe kind of get the check valve in. But I kind of massage the check valve in there because sometimes it doesn't want to go in. I'll just massage it back and forth while pushing a pretty decent force down here. And then eventually you'll either hear it click in, pop in, or sometimes it'll just go in. And in my case now, the body of the check valve is resting against the primer base. As long as the check valve doesn't pop back out, you should be good. I'm going to go ahead and lift this up here, and you could see that that lip is below. I cannot see that lip anymore, so it's below that brass fitting, which is what we want. That is correct. So that's good news. That means that check valve is in there. That check valve shouldn't come out. That should be in there very, very solid. Lastly, we have to put the primer bulb back on and the primer base. And the primer base cover and the screws. So in my case, my primer bulb is in pretty good shape. A way you can test it is if you take your primer bulb and squeeze it like this, right at the end here, if it either starts cracking or leaking right at the end here, then you know that it's time for a new one because it will break very, very, very shortly afterward. If that's the case, pick up a new primer bulb. And you do have to be careful because most of the primer bulbs you'll find online are the Zama primer bulbs. They are just a little bit bigger than the Walbro one. Here, I'll show you. Okay, so this is a Zama primer bulb. Zama is the other very large carburetor manufacturing company for these small engines. This primer bulb is just a hair bigger than this one. You probably can't see it from the naked eye, but if you take the correct primer bulb, it's going to slide right in there. Right? But if you take the Zama one, it's not going to want to go in there, right? There's going to be a little a little bit of a gap on the end. Sometimes what you can do is you can kind of twist it in or kind of, work it in. There, it's kind of in there now, but this is technically not the correct primer bulb for this. It may work, but I would definitely try to find a Walbro primer bulb because this one is snug. It will fit right in. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Also, the hole on the primer base cover here will fit right into the Walbro one, like that. Whereas the Zama one, it's really, really difficult to push it all the way down. There's still a little gap there. It went on most of the way, to be honest, but once you put it on and try to suck everything down, it's a little bit harder. So make sure to go with the Walbro primer bulb if you end up replacing. To get the primer bulb in, what I like to do is I just like to push it, and maybe I'll give it a little bit of a twist just to make sure it seats correctly. So with this cover, there's actually only one way this cover will go on. So if you go to put your cover on, and you look at the bolt holes and you think, oh, well, the bolt holes are a little bit off, it's not going to go on. Take your cover and rotate it 180 degrees, and the bolt holes line up perfectly in my case now. So if the cover doesn't go on, just flip it over and it'll go on. And keep in mind throughout all this, I'm still holding down my primer base cover so it doesn't come off. Because if I let go, it's very likely that everything will pop back off and I have to start from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and line those up, and I'm going to take my last two screws, the big ones from the primer base cover. I'll go ahead and set both of those screws back in here, and I'm going to take my screwdriver and I'm just going to snug them up. I'm not going to tighten them, but I'm just going to snug them up. Again, not too tight. These guys are a little bit less fragile than the metering screws, but you still want to be careful because they are small screws. And then and only then can you let go of the primer base cover. Everything will be held in place by those screws if they are snug enough. Once you've snugged up those screws, just make sure there's no gaps in your gasket area. Make sure that it kind of went on okay. Make sure that the idle screw kind of lines up with the butterfly here. Make sure that's all aligned okay. And make sure your primer bulb is seated well. And then I'm going to go ahead and tighten my screws. Again, only like a quarter turn past snug for me. They don't really want to move anymore. And they will break. That one went a half a turn, but you can kind of tell they kind of want to stop moving at some point. But and then another thing I like to do is I just like to pump my primer bulb a little bit. A good way to test that the carburetor is actually holding vacuum is put your finger over the lower fuel fitting, not the one that's on the primer base, but the one that's on the carburetor, the lower. If you put your finger over that and start pumping the primer bulb, if the primer bulb starts to retract slower, then you have compression in your carburetor. Sometimes it's different on other carburetors than this one, but you can tell that the the primer bulb is retracting just a little bit slower. And then if you put it up to your ear, when you let go of the lower fuel fitting, you'll hear a little hiss. I don't know if you heard that or not, but there's a little hiss that goes when you let go of that. And we're done. The carburetor's all rebuilt and put back together. Now, I would suggest after a carburetor rebuild, it's always a good idea to adjust your screws. If you put your carburetor back on and it still doesn't run right or at all, it's a really good thing to look up a video on how to adjust these carburetor screws. I should be coming out with one very shortly, but it is a very complicated process. So if you don't know what you're doing, definitely do not touch these screws. Again, if you don't know what you're doing, don't touch these screws, but it's definitely a very good thing that if your carburetor does not work correctly after a rebuild, to adjust them. I would say on probably about 60 to 70% of carburetors that I rebuild, I have to touch these screws. Even if it's just a little bit, I have to touch them and adjust it. But if you don't have to, then that's good. Sometimes it will come out successful without having to touch these guys. But, you know, it's a whole process to learn how to adjust these guys. And if you don't know what you're doing, either try to find somebody who knows how to do it, or do some research and see if you can figure out how to do it. It's definitely essential to adjust the carburetor screws after a rebuild, but not before a rebuild, because if you go to adjust them before a rebuild and it may work right, the next time you start it, it's not going to work right because the diaphragm is very inconsistent before a rebuild. So definitely adjust them after a rebuild. But that's it. Our Walbro carburetor is completely rebuilt. You should be able to go ahead and put it back on your unit. Sometimes it's always a good idea to grab a new intake gasket that goes here. I know on the Troy-Bilts, the Bolins, the MTDs, the Remingtons, they have a little yellow O-ring that goes on here. And in that case, you're good to go. Usually those O-rings don't go bad. Usually you're good to go. You could just slap it back on. But if you have like a Weed Eater or a Home Light or like a Husqvarna or an Echo, something like that, usually they have an intake gasket that goes right here. I recommend always replacing that whenever you remove the carburetor, because they usually don't seal up very good, especially after they've been on there for a prolonged amount of time. But that is it. Your Walbro carburetor is fully rebuilt, and in theory, your machine should run better, whether or not you have to touch these screws or not. But for now, that's all for me. I hope that this video helped you guys out a little bit. Rebuild your carburetor. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.